Montana Territory, late summer of 1877. The wind off the high plains carried dust and silence until a lone rider crested the ridge just past the Yellowstone River, his horse tossing its head as they slowed. Ferran Ridgeway squinted against the sun. His shirt clung to his back, soaked from the long ride. He had no plans to stop, just passing through on his way toward Bozeman, but something caught his eye in the dry grass below, a flicker of movement near the edge of a collapsed wagon. He reined in. "Easy," he murmured to his horse, dismounting quick. The wagon was half in a ditch, its wheel cracked clean through. A chest spilled open near it, clothes scattered and sun-faded. Lying beside it, tangled in a blanket and barely moving, was a woman. She was young, maybe 20, and pale as bone under the layer of dust and sweat. Her lips were cracked, her eyes half-lidded, breath shallow. Ferran crouched beside her, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead, burning up. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. "Water." He reached for his canteen and helped her drink. She swallowed like it hurt, but she drank. He brushed a strand of light brown hair from her cheek. The fever had her good. "You alone out here?" he asked. She blinked slow. "My horse ran. I tried to walk. I fell. I think I've been here 2 days. I need to get you out of the sun." He glanced around. No shelter, but a cluster of cottonwoods near the river. He wrapped the blanket tighter around her and lifted her into his arms. She did not weigh much. As he settled her into his saddle, she murmured something against his chest. "What's your name?" he asked as he led the horse toward the trees. Edda Dovall." "All right, Miss Dovall, I am Ferran. We will get you through this." She passed out before they reached the trees. He made camp under the wide limbs of a cottonwood, laying her on a bed of his own saddle blankets. He stripped off his coat and soaked it in river water, laying it across her chest to pull the heat from her. All through the night, Ferran stayed close, waking her every half hour to get water into her, wiping her face with a damp cloth, whispering quiet words he had not used in years. Before dawn, he built a fire with shaking hands. She moaned, twisting weakly under the blanket. "SHH," he said. "You are safe now." When the sun rose again, she opened her eyes fully for the first time, slow and wary, like she was not sure if she had made it through the worst. "You are real," she whispered. Ferran gave a tired half-laugh. "Real as dust." Edda tried to push herself up, but she was too weak. "The wagon. My family's last things were in there, my mother's Bible. My sewing I will ride back," he said. "Whatever can be saved, I will bring it to you." She looked at him like she did not quite believe he meant it, but she nodded. Ferran found the wagon again that afternoon. Some of the items were ruined by rain and sun, but he salvaged what he could: an embroidered shawl, a small Bible wrapped in oilskin, a tin box of thread and needles. When he returned, Edda was sitting upright, bare feet tucked under her, trembling from the effort. "You kept your word," she said, surprised. "I said I would." She touched the edge of the shawl he handed her, then looked up at him. Her eyes were still glassy with fever, but there was something clearer there now: relief. Trust. That night, Ferran made soup from dried beans and rabbit, feeding her small bites while the fire cracked low. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "North. My uncle had a cabin near Judith Gap. I was trying to get there after my father passed. He was all I had left." "Why did you not wait for someone to go with you?" "I did not have anyone to wait for." She said it without bitterness, just a quiet truth. Ferran nodded. He understood that kind of loneliness. Days passed. Edda's fever broke on the 4th morning. Ferran woke to find her sitting beside the fire, her hair braided back, the shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "You look more alive," he said, smiling a little. She glanced at him. "I feel it." He poured her coffee and handed it over. Their fingers brushed. "Thank you," she said, studying his face. "You did not have to stop. Most men would have kept riding." Ferran shrugged. "I could not leave you like that." She looked down at her tin cup, then back up slowly. "That matters." That night she asked him where he was headed. He told her he did not know anymore. The trail had grown quieter in his heart since he found her. "Maybe I will stay close until you get to your uncle's," he said. Edda's smile was quiet, but it reached all the way to her eyes. I would like that. The next morning she packed what little she had and climbed up behind Ferran on his horse. Her arms circled his waist, light at first, then tighter. Neither of them said anything about it, but he felt the warmth of her cheek against his back and something inside him shifted. They rode slow. She was still healing. Ferran made sure she did not have to walk once. Every night he built the fire and fixed her food. She mended a tear in his sleeve one evening, her fingers brushing his wrist. "You are good with your hands," he said. "I used to sew for my neighbors." "It gave me something to do after my mother passed," he nodded. "You have been through a lot." "So have you," she said, quiet. She looked at him like she saw something more than just a cowboy in dust-covered boots. The wind rustled the grass around them. Ferran reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. She held still, watching him. "I do not know what comes next," she whispered. "Me neither," he said. "But I would like to figure it out with you." Edda's breath caught. She leaned into his hand. "Okay," she said. That night, as the fire crackled low and the stars blinked overhead, she fell asleep beside him, her head on his shoulder. Ferran did not move for a long time. He just sat there, watching her breathe, feeling something settle in his chest he had not felt in years. Peace. And the start of something real. The morning air turned sharper as they climbed into higher country. Pine gave way to spruce, and the wind carried the scent of stone and cold water. Ferran guided the horse along a narrow trail that edged above a creek. Edda pressed close behind him, quiet as always but more alert now, her hands steady at his waist. When they stopped to let the horse rest, she slid down carefully, folding her arms and looking out across the valley below. Her cheeks had color again, faint but growing. Ferran watched her from where he knelt, checking the horse's hooves. "You ever been this far north?" she asked without turning. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Not past the Judith Basin." "Trails kept me south, cattle work mostly." She nodded, then knelt near a patch of wild thyme growing in the rocks, plucking a few sprigs. "If we boil this with water and willow bark, it helps with the aches." His brow lifted. "You know plants, my mother did." "I just paid attention." She tucked the leaves into her satchel and looked at him with her chin tilted slightly, like she expected him to dismiss it. "That's useful," he said. Her face softened and she looked down, brushing a bit of soil from her skirt. They made camp early that evening, beside a deep bend in the creek where the water slowed and pooled clear. Edda knelt by the bank to wash her hands and face. Ferran watched her reflection ripple beside her real face, both quiet, both strong. As he set a pot to warm over the flames, she returned holding 2 smooth stones. "These look like the ones my father used for sharpening," she said, handing one to him. "Thought you might need it." He turned it over in his palm. "I do, in fact." She sat across from him, legs crossed beneath her, and leaned forward just slightly. "That's the first time you said what you need." Ferran hesitated, then began working the stone along his knife's edge. The scraping filled the silence until he finally said, "I've found it easier to keep to myself." "You don't have to with me," she said, her voice low but certain. His hand slowed, then stopped. "You don't know me," he said. "I'm learning." He met her eyes. They held steady. Later, after the fire died down to coals, she unrolled her blanket beside his. Not touching, but close enough to feel warmth if the wind shifted. She lay on her side, facing him. "My uncle keeps bees," she murmured into the dark. Ferran turned his head. "Bees? He writes about them like they're people. Says they mourn when the keeper dies and return to the hive quiet for days." He didn't answer right away. "You think that's true?" she asked. "I've seen cattle stand still around a dead herd dog." "I reckon animals feel more than we know." She was quiet a moment, then said, "I hope they mourned my father." Ferran shifted onto his elbow. "What kind of man was he?" He never raised his voice, not once, even when he should have. "He taught me to keep the lantern chimney clean and how to read a map. He used to hum when he carved cedar." Ferran listened, his breath slow. "You got his steadiness." She smiled faintly, eyes closed now. "That's the kindest thing anyone said to me." By the time the moon passed over the ridge, she was asleep. Ferran stayed awake longer, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breath, letting it settle something deep in his chest. The next day, the wind shifted. Clouds hung low over the mountains, heavy with the scent of coming rain. They rode through tall grass that moved like water around them. Edda leaned forward to speak near his ear. "There's a schoolhouse near my uncle's land, just a single room." He glanced back. "You thinking of teaching? If he'll help me get set up, I'd like to. I've always wanted to." Ferran gave a short nod. "You'd be good at it." She didn't answer right away, then she said, "I'd like you to stay." "If you want to." He didn't speak, not until they stopped beneath the eaves of a rocky outcrop as the rain started. He helped her down, then took her face lightly in his hands, thumbs brushing her temples. "I want to," he said simply. She closed the space between them, her forehead resting against his chest. Rain tapped softly on the stone above them. Neither moved for a long time. That evening they reached the edge of her uncle's land. Split rail fences bordered a pasture, and smoke curled from a chimney in the hollow. Edda stared at it, unmoving. "You ready?" Ferran asked quietly. "I think so," she said, then slipped her hand into his. He held it like something that belonged there. The cabin stood quiet behind a low split rail gate, its shingles dulled by years of wind and snow. Smoke drifted faintly from the flue, carrying the scent of fir and damp oak. Ferran dismounted first and helped Edda down, his hand steady beneath her elbow. Her uncle, a man with shoulders still broad with labor, opened the door at the sound of hooves but hung back a moment, as though uncertain what time might have made of the girl he knew. "Edda," he said. She stepped forward, eyes glistening. "I made it, Uncle Merritt." He didn't answer with words, just opened his arms and pulled her in, holding her the way a man holds something nearly lost. Ferran stepped back, giving them space. He kept his hat in hand until Merritt turned toward him. "You the one brought her through?" "I am," Merritt nodded once. "You're owed something for that." "Not a thing," Ferran said. They stayed the night in the cabin. Merritt offered Ferran the cot near the stove and gave Edda the small back room once used by his late wife. She didn't speak much through supper, but her hand brushed Ferran's beneath the table as she passed him the bread. It was a quiet touch, fleeting, but it lived warm in his chest long after the fire burned down. By the second morning, Ferran had fixed one of the barn's hinges and helped Merritt haul wood to the lean-to. Edda stood on the porch with a shawl across her shoulders, her braid trailing down her back. "Come walk with me," she said when Ferran came up for water. They followed the fence line north, past the edge of the pasture. The ground was soft with yesterday's rain, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. "I used to pretend this land went on forever," she said, stepping over a fallen branch. "When my father would send letters from here, he'd try to draw the hills like I'd forget the shape of them." "You ever think about leaving it behind?" Ferran asked. "I tried to," she said. "Didn't take." He stopped near a rise where the wind picked up. "You got plans now?" She turned to him, a hint of color in her cheeks from the walk. "Merritt says the school board's been short a teacher since spring. They'd let me take the post if I pass their reading and cipher tests. You'll manage that." She looked up at him then, her eyes steady. "I want you to stay." There was no hesitation in her voice, no soft edge to it, just the plain truth of a choice laid bare. He nodded once. "I've been thinking the same." She stepped closer, her boots sinking slightly in the soft clay. "You never said where you came from." "Know where I'd go back to," he said. "I drifted after the war, took work where it came. I don't think I ever stopped long enough to want anything solid." "And now, I want this," Ferran said, eyes holding hers. "Land, a roof." "You," her breath caught, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Then she reached up, cupping his face with fingers calloused from stitching and travel. He leaned into her touch like a man remembering what warmth felt like. "I never thought I'd belong to anything again," she whispered. "You belong here," he said. They walked back hand in hand. That evening, Merritt pulled Ferran aside while Edda shelled beans on the porch. "She's got more grit in her than folks ever gave her credit for," Merritt said. "You planning to see this through?" Ferran looked toward her, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek, the quiet ease in her shoulders. I am. Merritt gave a single nod, then handed him a key. That tool shed's yours, needs a new roof and a cot. Figured you might want somewhere to start. The days settled into rhythm. Edda studied by lamplight and walked to the schoolhouse with Ferran each morning to take measure of the repairs it needed. He patched the windows, sanded the desks, and built a proper latch for the front door. One afternoon, she stood beside him, watching as he planed a board for the porch steps. I never saw you with a rifle, she said. He looked up. I keep it wrapped in my bedroll, used to carry it close. Don't feel the need so much anymore. Because of me. Because of this, he said, gesturing to the schoolhouse, the hills, the life beginning to take shape. You remind me what it's for. Her hand found his again, fingers lacing through with ease now, like they'd been made to fit that way. That night he stood with her beneath the stars, the sky wide and deep above them. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. I don't need more than this, she said. Good, he murmured, because I'm not going anywhere. And he meant it, every word. The first frost came quiet in the night, silvering the porch rails and clinging to the last of the wild asters by the fence. Ferran stepped outside with a lantern and watched his breath curl into the air, boots crunching softly over the stiff grass. Inside, he heard the soft creak of floorboards as Edda moved about the cabin, stoking the stove and setting the kettle to boil. She joined him a few minutes later, shawl wrapped high on her neck, a wool cap pulled low over her ears. Her smile came easy now, shaped by comfort, not necessity. I think the hens have stopped laying, she said, rubbing her hands together. They'll start again come spring, Ferran replied. They just don't care for the cold. They walked the short trail to the schoolhouse. Edda carried a satchel filled with slates and readers, her steps brisk despite the chill. Ferran held the door while she stepped inside, then followed, setting to work mending the stove pipe in the corner. After a while, she glanced up from the desk she was arranging. Merritt asked if you'd help with the irrigation trench before freeze sets in. I'll go after dinner, Ferran said, tightening the pipe collar. She hesitated, then said, he mentioned the barn's old tack room might do to sleep in this winter. Said he'd help you seal the gaps. Ferran straightened and met her eyes. You want me there or here? I want you where you feel right, she said, but I hope that's here. He didn't answer, only crossed the short space between them and cupped her cheek. Her eyes closed briefly beneath his touch. That night, after the supper plates were washed and the lamp trimmed low, Ferran sat across from her with his sleeves rolled and hands idle. Edda rolled a ball of yarn slowly, fingers nimble and sure. I used to watch my mother do this, she said. She always said idle hands let sorrow slip in. Ferran leaned forward. You still carry much of it, not like before, she murmured. I think I'm learning what it feels like to look forward again, he nodded, eyes on her hands. I never knew what settled could mean, not really. You've made me think on it. Do you miss the trail? He thought a moment. I miss the stars without roofs, but I don't miss the silence. Edda looked up, surprised. I always thought the trail would be loud, dust, men, guns. The loudest part's what you carry in your head, he said, voice low. The rest fades. She set the yarn aside and stood slowly, crossing to him. She didn't sit, just rested her fingers lightly on his shoulder. I don't want to rush you, she said, but I want you to know you're part of this now. If you want to be. He rose, quiet and calm, and took her hands in his. I already am. The days shortened. Snow dusted the ridge just past the pasture, and the mornings grew brighter with frost. Ferran worked alongside Merritt, digging the last length of trench near the orchard. He said little, but the old man noticed the way Ferran's eyes followed the ridgeline each evening, always returning to the cabin with purpose. Edda passed her school examination in early November. The councilmen from Lewistown rode up with their ledgers and questions, and when they left, she stood straighter than he'd ever seen her, eyes shining beneath her bonnet. I didn't stumble once, she whispered, breathless. You never would have, Ferran said. That night, after Merritt turned in, she stepped out onto the porch and found Ferran oiling his boots. "I've been thinking," she said. He looked up, waiting. "I'd like to fix up the north room, make it proper." "For what?" "For us," she said, "if you'd want that." He didn't speak. He set the oilcloth down and crossed to her, hands sliding around her waist. "I want it," he said, voice low against her temple. "Every part of it." The stars burned clear above the pines. She leaned into him, and for the first time since that fevered day by the broken wagon, she let herself feel what it meant to be fully held not in desperation, but in promise. No more drifting. No more waiting for the next trail to open. They had found their place. Together. The north room filled with the smell of fresh-cut pine by the time the first true snow settled across the valley. Ferran had spent the better part of a week sealing the windows and planing new floorboards, his coat dusted white by the time he came in each evening. Edda dragged an old braided rug from the loft and laid it down just off-center, where the morning sun would catch it best. "This room's brighter than I remembered," she said, smoothing her hand over the sill. "You see things different when you know you'll be waking up to them," Ferran replied, fitting the last latch into place. She leaned against the doorway, watching him as he stood. "There's enough room for a cradle." He turned toward her, brow lifting. "You thinking ahead? I'm not afraid to anymore." They didn't speak of it again that night, but when he took her hand across the supper table, she didn't let it go until the lamp burned down low and the dishes sat clean by the basin. By mid-December, the schoolhouse held the laughter of children. Edda walked there each morning bundled in her new wool coat, a gift from Merritt made from one of his late wife's bolts of cloth. Ferran split the morning between the barn and helping a neighbor 2 ridges over repair a collapsed shed. He'd taken to carrying a small book Edda lent him, reading a few pages each night, tracing the words slow but patient. One evening, she found him in the lean-to, lantern hung low, lips moving silently over the lines. She didn't say anything, just stepped in and set a hand on his shoulder. "I've been thinking I'd like to take your name," she said. He looked up, eyes steady on hers. "You sure? Some things you just know." They were married in Merritt's sitting room on a still morning in January. The preacher from Lewistown arrived in a wagon drawn by 2 bay mares, his boots coated in snow halfway to the knee. Edda wore her mother's brooch and a dress she'd sewn herself, hand stitched along the hem with a thread so fine it caught the light. Ferran stood beside her in his only good shirt, hair combed back, hands clean but rough in hers. "You got someone to witness?" the preacher asked. Merritt raised his hand from the hearthside chair. "I'll do." The vows were simple, spoken low but clear, and when Ferran kissed her, it was with his hand cupped at the back of her neck, as though anchoring something too precious to let drift. They moved into the north room that evening. Edda lit the lamp while Ferran laid a small fire in the stove, the walls still holding the faint scent of linseed and pine. "You nervous?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. He shook his head, crossing to her. "Not once since I met you." They lay close beneath the quilts, her head tucked under his chin, her breath warm against his collarbone. Sleep came slow but easy. By spring, the thaw reached the last of the lowland creeks. Ferran built a new gate for the west pasture and helped Edda clear space behind the schoolhouse for a little garden. She planted early peas and onions, her hands firm in the soil. "You ever think about teaching grown men to read?" he asked one afternoon, watching her press seed into earth. "You volunteering?" "I might be." She smiled without looking up. "You get through that book and we'll talk." Merritt started spending more time on the porch than in the field. His joints ached in the damp mornings, and Ferran took over the heavier chores without being asked. Some days, Edda brought papers to grade on the bench beside him, and they'd sit until the sun dipped past the ridge, her hand resting lightly on his knee. That summer, Ferran built her a writing desk from scrap lumber and trimmed it with a strip of elderwood. When he gave it to her, she ran her fingers over the grain and didn't say a word for a full minute. "You made this for me." "I did." She traced the corner once more. "No one's ever built me something that lasts." He kissed her then, slow and careful, like the moment needed nothing more than stillness to make it whole. When their child came the next spring, it was in the soft hush of early morning, with rain tapping lightly on the roof. Ferran never left her side, his hand gripped tight in hers. They named the boy Elias after her father. He grew steady and strong, walking early and quiet like his mother, but with Ferran's watchful eyes. They raised him in the rhythm of the land-measured days, honest work, and evenings by the fire. Edda read to him each night, and when he was old enough, she taught him to write his name in the same schoolhouse where she'd first found her footing again. Years passed. The fence lines stretched farther, the orchard took root, and the porch posts wore smooth from leaning. One autumn, Ferran stood watching the hills turn gold and rust while Edda rocked their second child, a girl with dark hair and a fierce grip. Merritt had passed peacefully the winter before, his chair by the hearth left empty but still dusted once a week. "You ever miss what came before?" Edda asked, her chin resting on Ferran's shoulder. "I don't carry it the same anymore," he said. "It's part of me, but it's not where I live." She nodded, settling the baby more firmly in her arms. "I'm glad you stayed." He turned toward her then, brushing a wind-blown curl from her brow. "There was never any other place I belonged." They stayed there on the porch until the shadows lengthened, their children safe inside, the valley quiet but full around them. And in that stretch of land between river and ridge, they built a life that held, each year deeper than the last, rooted in days earned and shared, and love that never once needed to be spoken to be known.